Hi everybody, greetings to you one and all. From time to time we've had requests from people asking us what life was like in Rhodesia. You know, apart from the war and the history and everything else that goes along with it, what was it like growing up there and living in that land? So I thought perhaps now and then we might just slip in a little video on that subject, and if it's okay with you, perhaps we can do that tonight. Besides which, today is a bit of a special occasion for me. I have finally arrived at my 20, and I'd like you to go back with me tonight, 68 years to my 12th birthday, if you will, and let's just take a little glimpse into what life was like at that time. Can I ask you a question? Do you believe in the power of prayer? Now, before anybody wants to reach over and change channels, let me just say what the great Larry King always said: don't touch that dial. I had two people that were quite significant in my life, other than my friends and my immediate family, when I was young. And this would be the time when I first went to junior school. I suppose, I don't know, how old would I have been? Oh, I don't know, 8, 7, 9 years old. I don't know, I'd have to work it out. But one of these people that were so significant in my life was a girl by the name of Miranda Steyn. And I thought this girl was absolutely stunning. I mean, I was mesmerized by her. We were in the same class at school, and I would sit there and stare across the room at her for ages. Well, I don't even think she knew that I existed, but I was certainly head over heels in love with this chick. And the other significant person was also in the classroom, and that happened to be our teacher, Mr. Adshade. Well, you can imagine it wasn't long after he joined us. He sort of came mid-term, I think, and the boys gave him the nickname of Mr. Lampshade. And he was a strange man. I never saw him smile. He was grim. He never spoke much. He was quiet, and of course that made him all the weirder in our eyes, and we were quite petrified of him because we didn't know what he was capable of. So those days they used to teach us with a system called rote, and at the front of the class, Mr. Adshade had a number of almost like roller blinds, if I can describe them that way, and he would pull these down, and the multiplication tables were written on there. 1 times 1 is 1, 1 times 2 is 2, etc., etc., and so on all the way down. And so Mr. Adshade would stand at the front of the class with a cane, with his back to us, and he would recite these multiplication tables, and we would have to repeat them over and over and over. And the theory was, and I mean, I'm not knocking it, the idea was that if you said a thing often enough, it would stick in your mind and you'd remember it. So he'd stand there with his cane in his left hand, beating it against his thigh. 3 1s are 3, 3 2s are 6, 3 3s are 9, and so on, and we would repeat this. But because he had his back to the class, I thought to myself, well, he hasn't got eyes in the back of his head, so he can't see what I'm doing. I'm going to see if I can attract Miranda's attention. So I wrote her a little note, and it said something like, "I like you," and I put an X. And then I looked at it and I thought, no, this X isn't adequate enough. It, X, it's like maybe cancel. So I changed that. I scribbled it out, and I very bravely put a little heart there. And I folded this piece of paper up, and then I gave it to the boy sitting next to me and asked him to pass it on to the next one. And the idea was, you know, I said, let's go to Miranda. Well, en route to Miranda, it was intercepted by a rather fat, ginger-haired boy who was a bit of a bully. And he's supposed to pass this note of mine on. No, what does he do? He opens it up and he reads it, and he starts chuckling, and he passes it to the boy at the back of him, and he looks at it, and of course, pretty soon there's a little bit of a disturbance at the back of the room. Sufficiently so that Mr. Adshade turns around and sees Ginger Hair with this note, and he calls him to the front. And of course, he doesn't keep quiet for a minute, does this boy. It's not mine, sir. It's Martin's. He was passing it around the class. Well, my heart just sank into my boots, and everybody looked at me, and Mr. Adshade gave me a glance, and he said to the boy, put it down on the table and return to your seat, which he did. And then outside the headmaster's office was a bell, and the bell rang, meaning it was the end of that period. So we were all allowed to go outside and have our sandwiches and play for a little bit, and then come back in. Well, it wasn't a fun time for me at all, because I was worried. What was Mr. Adshade going to do? Was he going to apply that cane to me? Because those were the days when teachers still did that kind of thing. And or would I be sent to the headmaster's office? When I didn't know what happened when I get to the headmaster's office. It was just a threat that always hung in the air there in that school. So I spent a miserable 20 minutes or half hour, whatever the break period was, absolutely shattered, you know. Couldn't think, couldn't do anything, just petrified at what awaited me when I went back to class. So, you know, nobody could help me. I mean, there was nothing I could do. And so I turned to prayer, and I prayed. But I mean, I really prayed, the kind of real deep stuff. Not the kind of thing that you close your eyes at night, gentle Jesus, meek and mild, look upon a little child, or, you know, whatever the words are of that little prayer. No, this was from the bottom of my heart. I needed salvation from Mr. Adshade real bad. And soon the bell rang, and it was time to return to our classrooms. Well, I kind of dragged my feet in there and looked across at the desk. My note was still lying there. Mr. Adshade stood up when we'd all settled down, and then his eye also caught this note, and he picked it up and read it. And I looked at him and I thought, it's the end of the world for me. You know, I prayed and I prayed, but I didn't have enough faith to believe that it would actually make any difference. So I watched Mr. Adshade lower the note, and he looked off into the distance with a faraway look in his eye, and gave a little sigh, picked up the note, tore it into 1,000 little pieces, threw it into the wastepaper basket, turned his back on us, took his cane, 9 ones are 9, 9 twos, and there we went through the 9 times multiplication table. Not a word from Mr. Adshade, not a word was said. And I think that there were a few boys over there who were hoping I was going to get a real good whacking in the front of the class for their entertainment, but it never happened. And so this had such an impact on me. I thought, well, if you know, it really works. There really is a God, and He really cares. And man, you know, all I've got to do is call upon Him. But you know, even a young kid backslides, eh? And it doesn't take long before, you know, you're very busy when you're young. You know, life is great, and there's a lot of stuff going on. So the last thing that you think about is spiritual stuff. You know, I mean, there's a lot of other things in life that are probably more interesting at that age, or at any age for some people. Well, the years go by, not many though, although they seem like a long time when you're young. And I find myself in another school in a completely different place. And I now live in Lochinvar, near Salisbury in Rhodesia. As I walk past the Booker's house, wow, what do I see? Leaning against their garage wall. Whoa, the most beautiful sight I think that I'd ever laid my eyes on. And yeah, but it wasn't a, it wasn't a girl. It was a motorcycle. But it was so old. I mean, even in those days, and I'm talking about a long time ago, I'm talking about the early 1950s, 70 years ago. Sure. Yeah. It was old then. I knew that I knew that much about motorbikes. I knew that this thing wasn't young. But it just fascinated me to no end. And I stood there for quite a while staring at it, looking at it, and I walked on home. And then I said to my dad later in the day when he came home from work, I see Mr. Booker's got a motorbike leaning against his garage wall. And the old man says, oh, that's nothing but an old bone shaker, man. That's not a motorbike. Now, my dad's an old motorcyclist. I mean, he used to race an OK Supreme. And when I first heard of that, I thought of OK Bazaars, and so didn't impress me very much. But I've gone on since then to find out that OK Supreme was a very fine mark in its day. Anyway, he didn't think much of the bike, and you know, so well, that was it. But my 12th birthday was coming up in a few weeks' time, and my mind went back to the problem that I had with Mr. Adshade. And I thought to myself, I wonder if God is powerful enough to give me that motorbike for my birthday present. And so I started praying again, real deep prayers, and pleading with the Lord for this motorcycle. And do you know, I don't know if I must have let something slip at home, or if the old man was more astute than I've ever credited him for. But on my 12th birthday, he says to me, you want to go for a walk? Let's go for a walk. Yeah, go for a walk on my birthday, man. Yeah, I want to do something else. Okay, all right. So we walk up to Mr. Booker's house, and Mr. Booker proudly wheels out this motorcycle, and he hands it to me. And the old man says, right, we'll push it home and then we'll see if we can get it going. So, yeah, I was absolutely astonished. Here I had this thing that I had been praying for. And we got it home, and then I was able to take a good look at it close up. Now, it was a machine so old that the headlamp was actually derived from an old miner's lamp that had been mounted onto this machine. It worked with acetylene, and so it had a little stainless steel tank that you unscrewed, and you put like grey lumps of they were called carbide, and you put them in there, close this up, and then there was a little water tank above this that you could open up, and this would drip a certain amount of water onto these chunks of carbide, and that would produce an acetylene gas. And then there was a burner there which only my old man knew how to light. I couldn't do that, and eventually he said to me, don't fiddle with it, I will light this lamp whenever you need it. But it wasn't needed much because, you know, the machine was really not supposed to be ridden around at night. And yeah, the old man bought some fuel, and the cap on the tank, if you unscrewed it, it had like a little cup underneath it, and that was filled with some oil, and you know, it was worked out in proportion, being a two-stroke engine, so much oil to so much fuel, which the old man did for me because he knew how to do it. And got this in the tank, shook the bike a little bit, and to mix it all, And then he said to me, right, now this is what you do. This bike had no Kickstarter. It had no self-starter, clearly not. I mean, this thing hailed from probably the 1930s and the early 1930s at that. So it had pedals on it, okay, and a clutch on the handlebar. And the idea was that you'd get astride it and pedal this thing down the road, holding the clutch in. And when you had attained a sufficient amount of speed, you'd let the clutch go. And this engaged the engine. The engine gave a few pops, in theory, and would start up and you could ride the bike. That's how the old man explained it to me. So, you know, it had a huge, big brass flywheel right about where you would want to put your left foot. And that worried me because I thought, I hope I'm not going to catch my feet in this thing. It's unprotected. And if you look through the slots of this brass wheel, you could see like electrical stuff. Well, that was the coil for the magneto that provided the spark. The front suspension was almost non-existent. It was like a girder fork arrangement, except there were no springs. There were, believe it or not, elastic bands. And they were so perished, I think that the minute I sat on the bike, they just bottomed out. The rear suspension, there was no rear suspension. It was a rigid frame. So it gives you some idea. Black motorbike, very old, rusted here and there, okay? But there was some gold leaf lining on the tank. And you could just faintly discern an emblem there, and underneath it was emblazoned that proud and glorious word, Excelsior. Well, it didn't mean much to me at that age, but I've since come to learn that Excelsior is a very exalted name in the motorcycle world of yesteryear. So I get on board this thing, and you know, my friends are gathered out there, and there are a number of dogs that have accompanied them, because that's how it seemed to be when we were young. You know, there's always dogs around us when we went walking and that, played in the street. And the old man says, right, you know what to do, go. So I hold in the clutch, and I start pedaling furiously, and down Acacia Road I go, and I drop the clutch, and sure enough, the engine fires up. And it was the most wonderful experience for me to be able to, you know, I can still imagine it to this day. I can still feel it. I still remember it so clearly as though it happened a few minutes ago. Down the road I went, under the power of this motorbike, around the corner, down at the T-junction, round the next corner, round the block, and I thought, I ain't stopping for nobody. But of course I was accompanied by a pack of howling and barking dogs, you know, but I wasn't worried about that. People came out of their houses to see what the noise was. It didn't have much of a silencer. There was a kind of a aluminium molding which was part of the engine casing, which had to serve as a silencer. And then there was a straight through pipe from there to the back axle where it was secured. It didn't do much in the way of silencing, but oh, what a lovely sensation that was. And so I rode that bike around Lochinvar. Every opportunity I got, I'd ride it until that tank was dry, and then, you know, I was eventually given enough pocket money to go down to the garage and put petrol and oil in myself, which I had learned to do eventually. And the other thing that I enjoyed at that stage was I had come across a boy walking with a baboon on his hand. Now that sounds very strange today, but it wasn't in those days. You know, you'd see people with all sorts of exotic pets. We didn't think of them as exotic, not a bauble. And he was, I stopped him and we were talking, and I said, where did you get it? And he gave me some sort of an answer, but I was too interested in this baboon to take in too much of what he told me. So he said, but I don't want it. He said, it's too much trouble. It breaks things in the house and my mom gets cross. So I said, oh, well, can I swap you something for it? And he said, yeah, what you got? And you know, I made the best deal of my life there. I swapped that bauble for a pair of old boxing gloves. And his name was Recco. And man, were he and I good friends. Now, Recco was so trusting that I could put him on my back, and get on the motorbike, and you know, he'd cling to my back, and I'd go riding around with this bauble on my back. And I would take a pellet gun with me at times. I had a Diana #1, and go off into Warren Hills and shoot doves there. And I'd take some matches with me and a knife and a bit of salt and so on. And I'd pluck these birds and clean them up and make a little fire and just spend the day out there. Provide for myself as far as lunch went. And Recco would amuse himself jumping around in the trees and so on. And he'd come when I call him, you know, so that he wouldn't be in the way if I took aim at anything. And then toward evening he'd get on my back again and we'd ride home. So it was a lovely life for a young child. And then we moved into Salisbury. And I hadn't taken the Excelsior to school up until that point, not from Lochinvar. But when we lived in Salisbury in the avenues, I rode the motorbike to school. And of course this created a bit of a sensation for the boys in my class there. There were other, they called them autocycles in those days. There were others there that were parked against the wall of Mr. Ian Lamont's art class. That seemed to be the place where all the motorized bicycles were parked. And there was a senior boy who had a bike that looked a lot more like a motorcycle, shall I put it that way, if you want me to be polite. I think his name was Mike Butters. I'm sure I got the name right. I don't think my memories failed me on that score. He went on, if I'm not mistaken, to become, you know, quite a well-known saloon car driver, a racer. Anyway, Mike Butters had this very nice autocycle, and I parked mine next to his. Well, it didn't look too good, you know. This old bone shaker against this very modern looking and speedy looking machine. And you know, there were a few remarks made by some of the boys, some unkind remarks, which I took to heart because I agreed with them. The bone shaker didn't really look very good. And then I got pestered by some of the boys. They wanted to ride this thing, and I really didn't think that they ought to, you know. So between Alan Wilson School and Prince Edward School, adjacent to the boxing club at Alan Wilson, there was a stretch of gravel road. It may still be there today for all I know, I don't know. But they would badger me, yeah, can we ride it? Please give us a ride. And I'd say, not on the road, we can go there and ride it. Now, Prince Edward School was known as a commercial school, so these guys, very little intelligence as far as mechanical stuff goes, and they accepted the fact that, look, I've got to prepare the bike before it'll run. You know, there's things I've got to fiddle with it, and then you can go and do it. Okay, fine, right. Then I'd go through the motions of opening the petrol tap and everything, but I would also pull the cap off the spark plug, and that never seemed to dawn on any of them that this was now disabling the machine. So they'd get on it. What must they do? You pull in the clutch and you pedal and you let it go. Up and down that stretch of road they would pedal with the sweat pouring off their faces, and some of them wouldn't give up, eh? And I'd say, well, it does that sometimes, you know, it's a very temperamental machine, this, and I sometimes wonder if I'll even get home on it. Until they gave up, and then I would get on it and magically the thing would come to life and I'd go on down the road. So, oh dear me. But you know, the time came when I thought to myself, I mean, I can't be seen on this bike anymore. I've got to have some self-respect for myself, you know. And so I stopped using it. And the old man wanted to know what's going on. Why are you not using the bike? You know, the bike's giving trouble. The old man would get on it and he'd go for a ride on it. Nothing wrong with it. And there never was anything wrong with that bike. It was a very reliable machine, I must say, despite the way it looked and despite its age. So, seeing that we're getting nowhere, the old man found a buyer for it and it was sold. And with the money he bought me a normal pedal bike, which I was quite happy with. And then I pedaled that thing to school, and that saved me the embarrassment of listening to my fellow pupils' remarks. So the bike was gone, but you know, I had a nice push bike, but you know, the fun of riding it, there was no fun. It was just a very boring means of transport. And I began to miss the old Excelsior, and I saw it one day standing on the veranda. I think it was somewhere in probably 5th Avenue somewhere, 5th Street, on somebody's, you know, outside somebody's front door on the stoep. And it looked so forlorn, and as I had stood there outside Mr. Booker's house looking at it, so I now stood there looking at it again. A lot of time had passed, you know, and I had had a lot of good times on that bike. So eventually I had to go home. I never said anything to anybody. I mean, it's crazy to have gone and approached my old man again and said, can he go buy it back? So the bike was gone. That was the last time I saw it. And now today, you know, I've had a lot of bikes since then. I've had a number of Triumphs, a number of Nortons, and a few other marks as well that you know, are of lesser well-known manufacturers. But nonetheless, if you were to ask me today, which of all those motorcycles that you've owned, and there are a great many, would you like to have today? If you could choose one amongst all of them, which is the one that you would like? And I think it would be that old Excelsior, purely because of the fun that I had on it and that sheer enjoyment the first time I went for a ride on it. An unbeatable experience. I would love to have it in the collection, and I wouldn't be ashamed of it today like I was then. So yeah, I think we must be careful what we are ashamed of in life. There may be value and beauty in that we don't see as clearly as we do with the passage of time. So I look fondly back on that Excelsior. Reco's gone. The cops had to take him away eventually. He escaped, should I say that in a manner of speaking. Jumped into a lady's baby's pram, frightened the death out of the kid and the mother, and he took off in and out of the streets of Salisbury there until he was apprehended by the BSAP and brought home. And I was given an offer I couldn't refuse. Either he's taken away and put down, or this cop could take him to a small zoo just outside of Salisbury, and he would be there with other bobbles. So yeah, I opted to have my dear friend imprisoned in a zoo. And later on, that policeman came back again to the house with, can you believe it, £5. And he said, my friend who owns the zoo thought he would send this by way of compensation. And if you ever wanted to go visit your bobo, you're more than welcome to come at any time. But I never did go. Never asked my folks to take me out there. He's gone, the Excelsior's gone, but the memories still remain, and that's the best, eh? We've got them. So folks, I'm almost at my destination now. Thank you for riding along with me. And yeah, the bone shaker. Yeah, you know, every Rhodesian will tell you that their childhood in that land was the best days of their lives, and it certainly was for me. So thank you for joining me this evening, and you know, we'll have some more trips down memory lane, I'm sure, at some point in the future. But in the meantime, keep well, yeah, take care, look after yourselves, and God bless you. Cheers for now.